Hi, my name is Holly, and every month I do this digital discussion for Edison Ford Winter Estates. And thank you for joining me today. Who is Molly Pitcher? Here's the lithograph. Let's talk about her a little bit. The Battle of Monmouth was fought at Monmouth Courthouse on June 28, 1778. So the Revolutionary War has been going on for about 3 years now. It's one of the largest battles of the Revolutionary War, with around 20,000 troops involved, and it ended in a stalemate. Although outnumbered by almost 2 to 1, the Continental Army had undergone extensive training during its winter encampment at Valley Forge. I'm sure you're all familiar with that. Charles Lee, who had not launched the initial attack, lacked confidence in the soldiers under his command. He's one on what we would consider the United States side at that point, colonial side, not the British side. So Lee's men attacked the British rear guard in the morning, but soon found themselves outnumbered. The British commander-in-chief, Clinton, had ordered an extra force under the command of General Charles Cornwallis to go back and bolster their numbers. Facing the risk of being overrun, Lee ordered a retreat, and that's a picture of it. Washington arrived ahead of his men and saw Lee's troops. He encountered panic-stricken troops fleeing the enemy. Furious, he stripped Lee of his command. I don't think you want Washington mad at you. And with the help of Generals Anthony Wayne and Nathaniel Greene is also going to be fighting during the Civil War. Washington reorganized his men into formation before launching a counterattack. The fighting went back and forth under the intense June sun for several hours. By 6 p.m., however, the British felt they had had enough. While Wayne wanted to continue, Washington refused, believing that his men were beat out with heat and fatigue. The British did not give Washington a chance to renew the fight in the morning because they had slipped out under cover of darkness and continuing their retreat to New York City. So why am I talking about this? Well, we're going to tell you about Molly Pitcher and her at the Battle of Monmouth, and what I cut off the top of her there, but you saw her initially at the beginning. We'll tell you a little bit more. Is Molly Pitcher even one person? Who was Molly Pitcher? There she is, loading a cannon. Molly originally was a person that carried pitchers of water, which a lot of women would go along with their husbands during the battles. And she carried water to the soldiers during the Revolutionary War's Battle of Monmouth, thus her nickname, Molly Pitcher. After her husband collapsed, during the battle, she took over his cannon. And there's the picture that's behind me. That most of it's cut off right now. But many people believe Molly Pitcher represents the roles that women played during the fight for American independence. Considered by many historians to be a combination of at least 3 women, Molly Pitcher symbolizes bravery and strength on and off the American Revolution battlefield. And there's a lot of prints, lithographs, paintings, drawings of Molly Pitcher, and I'm going to put that in quotes. While Margaret Corbin and Deborah Sampson are believed to be inspirations for Molly Pitcher, the closest resemblance to the renowned Molly Pitcher is Mary Molly Ludwig Hayes. In 1854, artist Dennis Malone Carter created a large canvas for Molly, with Molly at its center holding a ramrod beside a cannon that just has been fired, her dead husband lying at her feet. Molly Pitcher at the Battle of Monmouth by Dennis Malone Carter in 1854, Francis Tavern Museum, New York City. So there's a lot of pictures of Molly, but they are all from what the artist has read or heard or pictured in their mind. And the popular photographers Currier and Ives sold a print showing a determined Molly jamming the ramrod into a cannon, also accompanied by the fallen husband, as well as a pail of water she had dropped. And note her clothing. I mean, this is very, one of the things I read was that she was dressed as a wealthy woman would have been, but that kind of doesn't go along with what was going on at the time. In a battle, would a woman go out on the battlefield dressed like that? This is from the Library of Congress Prints and Photographs Division. Deborah Sampson became a hero of the American Revolution when she disguised herself as a man and joined the Continental Army to serve in the Revolutionary War. She was the only woman to earn a full military pension for participation in the Revolutionary War. Well, how could she be Molly Pitcher? Well, I'll tell you a little bit more. Born on December 17th, 1760 in Plimpton, Massachusetts, near Plymouth, Sampson was one of 7 children born to Jonathan Sampson and Deborah Bradford Sampson. Both were descendants of well-known pilgrims, and sometimes you hear a couple of different things about, her genealogy. But those pilgrims are Miles Standish and Priscilla Alden, which, when you remember the story of Thanksgiving and going to Plymouth Rock and those things, those are the names that come up. And she was the great-granddaughter of Massachusetts Governor William Bradford. The Sampsons struggled financially, and after Jonathan failed to return from a sea voyage, his destitute wife was forced to place her children in different households. 5 years later, at age 10, Deborah was hired as an indentured servant, so she'd have to work until she paid off her time for her room and board, to Deacon Benjamin Thomas, a farmer in Middleborough with a large family. I can't even imagine what that was like for her. But at age 18, with her indenture finished, Sampson, who was self-educated, didn't go to school, but had taught herself, worked as a teacher during the summer sessions in 1779 and 1780, and as a weaver in the winter. Well, that's a long ways from going to fight a battle in the Revolutionary War. Here's what happens. And that's her ancestral home in Massachusetts. In early 1782, Sampson joined an army unit in Middleborough, Massachusetts, under the name Timothy Thayer. She collected a bonus and then failed to meet up with her company commander. But it was by the time Sampson had been recognized by a local resident at the time, she signed her enlistment papers. So there was no way she was going to show up because they wouldn't have let her go. Her deception uncovered, she repaid the portion of the bonus she had not spent, but she was not subjected to any further punishment by the Army. But they didn't know how determined she was, because in May 1782, Sampson enlisted again, this time in Uxbridge, Massachusetts, under the name Robert Shirtliff, also spelled in some sources Shirtlife or Shirtleff. And sometimes the penmanship is hard to read, or when it's transcribed, it's put incorrectly. She had joined the Light Infantry Company of the 4th Massachusetts Regiment under the command of Captain George Webb. This unit, consisting of 50 to 60 men, was quartered in Bellingham, Massachusetts, and later mustered into Worcester with the rest of the regiment, commanded by Colonel William Shaffer. Light infantry companies were elite troops, specially picked because they were taller and stronger than average. And I believe her height at the time was believed to be about 5'7" or 5'8". Their job was to provide rapid flank coverage for advancing regiments, as well as rear guard and forward reconnaissance duties for units on the move. Because she joined an elite unit, Sampson's disguise was more likely to succeed, since no one was likely to be looking for a woman among soldiers who were specially chosen for their above-average size. Remember, this is quite a while ago, 250 years ago, and were specially chosen for their above-average size and superior physical ability. So keep that in mind. Deborah was much taller than the average woman during that time. And there's a statue of Deborah in front of the Sharon Public Library in Massachusetts. In July 1782, Sampson participated in combat near Tarrytown, New York, with about 30 infantrymen from her unit, who skirmished with a local band of Tories, the British. Sampson was shot in her thigh and had a sword cut to her forehead. She begged her fellow soldiers not to take her to a doctor out of fear her gender would be discovered, but a soldier put her on his horse and took her to a hospital. A doctor treated her head wounds, but she left the hospital before he could treat her leg. Obviously, she didn't want to be discovered as a woman. She removed the ball herself with a penknife and sewing needle. Man, was she brave. But some of the shot was too deep to reach. Her application for a pension described how her leg never fully healed. We'll get to that later. But on April 1st, 1783, she was reassigned to new duties and spent 7 months serving as a waiter, like an assistant, not like a waiter in a restaurant, to General John Patterson. On June 24th, the President of Congress ordered George Washington to send a contingent of soldiers under Patterson to Philadelphia to help quell a rebellion of American soldiers who were protesting delays in receiving their pay and discharges. During the summer of 1783, Sampson became ill in Philadelphia and was cared for by Dr. Barnabas Biney. After Sampson fell unconscious due to fever, I'm going to imagine that she had an infection for a long time from that being in her leg. Dr. Biney removed her clothes to treat her and discovered the cloth she used to bind her breast. Without revealing his discovery to Army authorities, he took her to his house, where his wife, daughters, and a female nurse cared for her. But that can't last. In September 1783, following the signing of the Treaty of Paris, the war is going to end. November 3rd was set as the date for soldiers to muster out. When Dr. Biney asked Sampson to deliver a note to General Patterson, she correctly assumed that it would reveal her gender. In other cases, women who pretended to be men to serve in the Army were reprimanded. Patterson gave her a discharge, a note with words of advice, and enough money to travel home. She was honorably discharged at West Point, New York, by General Henry Knox on October 25th, 1783, after about a year and a half of service. Official record of Deborah Sampson Gannett's service as Robert Shurtleff from May 20th, 1782 to October 20th, 1783 appears in the Massachusetts Soldiers and Sailors of the Revolutionary War. Receiving an honorable discharge on October 23rd, 1783, Sampson returned to Massachusetts, and this is her grave in Sharon, Massachusetts. On April 7th, 1785, she married Benjamin Gannett from Sharon, and they had 3 children and adopted a 4th, who had been left an orphan. She received a military pension from the state of Massachusetts. Although Sampson's life after the Army was mostly typical of a farmer's wife, in 1802, she began a year-long lecture tour about her experiences, the first woman in America to do so, sometimes dressing in full military dress. 4 years after Sampson's death from yellow fever at age 66, her husband petitioned Congress for pay as a spouse of a soldier. The committee concluded that the history of the Revolution furnished no other similar examples of female heroism, fidelity, and courage. I think there's a couple more, but I think he deserves her pension. He was actually awarded the money, though he died before receiving it, and there's her grave, and it looks like it's well kept, given the age of the grave. I hope it still is. So she's one possible person. That's Molly Pitcher. Is there anybody out there that's really named Molly Pitcher? No, but there's 3 choices here of possible women that could be Molly Pitcher. Molly was born in Franklin County, Pennsylvania. Margaret, was born in Franklin County, Pennsylvania on November 12th, 1751. She was orphaned at age 5 when her father was killed during an Indian raid, and her mother was taken captive and never returned. She and her brother were raised by an uncle. In 1772, when she was 21 years old, she married John Corbin, who joined the Pennsylvania military 3 years later. Instead of staying home, Corbin left with her husband. So remember, Deborah didn't have a husband at the time. More typically, when women did this, they went along with their husband. She left with her husband for war, becoming a camp follower who earned money cooking and doing laundry for soldiers. She also helped take care of the sick and wounded. On November 16th, 1776, Corbin decided to dress as a man and joined her husband in the Battle of Fort Washington at Manhattan Island. There she helped him load his cannon, and when he was killed, she quickly and heroically took over firing the cannon against the British. Other soldiers commented on Captain Molly's steady aim and sure shot. Eventually, however, she was also hit by enemy fire, which nearly severed her left arm and severely wounded her jaw and left breast. She was unable to use her left arm for the rest of her life. The British eventually won this battle, and Molly was among the prisoners of war who were paroled and released back to the revolutionary hospitals. And there's a plaque at Fort Tryon, New York, where this took place, and it says, during the British Hessian attack on Fort Washington, 16th November 1776, Margaret Corbin, wounded when she filled the post of her husband, John, who was killed while loading artillery, the first woman to fight as a soldier in the Revolutionary War. She is buried at West Point, and this is the Chamber of Commerce, Washington Heights, Inwood. Corbin struggled financially, and there's another monument there, obviously a picture taken during the winter. After she recovered, she joined the Invalid Corps at West Point, where she helped the wounded until she was formally discharged in 1783. On July 6, 1779, the Continental Congress, in recognition of her brave service, awarded her with a lifelong pension equivalent to half that of male combatants. Congress also gave her clothes to replace the ruined ones during the conflict. You'd think she'd deserve a full pension, wouldn't you? In 1782, she married a wounded soldier, but he died a year later. It is said that Molly found it difficult to make female friends. Instead, she enjoyed talking with fellow soldiers. And I will read what one of the things I researched on her said is she said, gruff and unfeminine, Corbin made few friends among the women of her time, instead feeling more at home smoking and conversing with other soldiers. And I don't know where they got that information that she was coarse and unfeminine. So I'm just going to leave that there, but I think that that's probably because she chose to fight very bravely as a soldier when her husband was killed. And this is also at a different place at Fort Tryon. And here's something interesting. That's a military photo, USA photo, but Margaret Corbin died in 1800 and was believed to have been buried in Highland Falls, New York, near West Point. The Daughters of the American Revolution received permission from West Point to have Corbin's remains reinterred at the West Point Cemetery in 1926. This dedication ceremony included full military honors and the erection of a monument. So when they dug up the bones, because they went looking for them in the general area where she was supposed to be, they thought they looked a little big, but they reburied them in a ceremony at West Point. The dedication ceremony included full military honors and the erection of a monument. A disturbance of the gravesite in the fall of 2016. So this is like when they dug them up in roughly the area where they believe Molly to have been buried, along with some other soldiers, apparently. And they reburied them. So there's a disturbance there. Something happens in 2016. I think it was maybe a heavy rain. I can't remember exactly. The project revealed when they dug these up and getting ready to rebury them, that the remains were not that of Margaret Corbin. I think they might have had a slim idea back in 1926. Thorough forensic studies conducted by the U.S. Army concluded that the remains were likely that of an unidentified man who was likely alive during the 18th or early 19th century. The Daughters of the American Revolution, who requested and fought in 1926 to have Corbin honored on the grounds of West Point the first time, did so again by hosting the rededication ceremony Tuesday, because this is May 8th, 2018. In collaboration with the Army National Military Cemeteries in West Point. So there's the statue to honor her, and she certainly deserves honoring, but the bones, they're not hers. But the tributes for her, this is from a military magazine, were certainly earned. Could she have been more likely than Deborah, who been Molly Pitcher? Maybe. The rededication celebrates the history of Corbin, who was one of the first women to serve in battle in defense of our nation as she took over her husband's cannon when he was mortally wounded during the Battle of Fort Washington. You don't hear those words much anymore. And what is known as Fort Tryon Park in Manhattan. We should take pride in patriots like Molly, who served in the past, thanks to those who serve today, and embrace the next generation to serve tomorrow, said Karen Durham Aguilera, Executive Director of the Army National Military Cemeteries. So obviously, she believed that she was the inspiration for Molly Pitcher. Corbin was Molly Pitcher. Corbin was severely wounded during the battle and taken prisoner before being paroled. I mentioned that before, and eventually assigned to the West Point Corps of Invalids, where she aided the wounded until she was discharged in 1783. On July 6, 1779, the Continental Congress gave her that half pension of male soldiers. Congress also gave her a suit of clothes. That just cracks me up. Place once ruined in the conflict. She married a wounded soldier, but he died a year later. And then again, they talk about how she didn't make friends among the females, and she dies near West Point before reaching her 50th birthday. And she was believed to be buried there, but as we know, those aren't her bones. And actually, there's some statues of female women that are heroes. This one, and you can see it's by a sculptor named John Hare. It's in Walton Beach, Florida, Okaloosa Veterans Park. And I have not seen this in person, but I would enjoy it very much. Certainly, this woman is a hero. Is she Molly Pitcher? I can't tell you that, but there's a chance. But she definitely was a very brave woman, as was Deborah Sanson. One more. I'll let you decide who you think it is, or does it matter because they all were very brave. Mary Ludwig was born in 1754, October 13th to be exact, to a German family in Pennsylvania, though other sources say that she was actually born in New Jersey. And historians kind of go back and forth, but she was either born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, or over the border into New Jersey. She was sent to Carlisle, Pennsylvania, which is not that far from Gettysburg, by the way, though a different time period when we focused on Gettysburg, to become a servant at Colonel William Irvin's home. Her parents are German immigrants, and some of the writings say that it was unlikely that she would have been taught to read or write during this time. When she was in her early 20s, she married a barber named William Hayes, who lived in the village in 1769, and she would have been about 15 years old, though other people believe she married at 13. And other people say she married in her early 20s. So her husband enlisted as a gunner in Captain Thomas Proctor's 4th Pennsylvania Artillery in 1775. In history, especially from other time periods when things get lost or it's not easy to read or all the history wasn't documented. Sometimes it's just you take the most likely. You're never going to completely know unless new information comes to light, which is why history is so fluid. The 4th Pennsylvania Artillery was adopted into the Continental Army in 1777. And was designated in 1779 as the 4th Continental Artillery. And her husband spent the winter of 1777 and 1778 at Valley Forge. It was not unusual. It was common for soldiers' wives to follow their husbands when they enlisted in the Army. That does happen somewhat in the Civil War, but I think it did a lot in the Revolutionary War. At least it seems like it does. Mary Hayes decided to join her husband at Continental Army camp, where she often watched clothes and cared for the sick. And she helped in assisting in bringing water to use to cool the artillery pieces when in use because they got very hot. And this one, of course, says that's where she probably got the name Molly Pitcher because her name was Mary. Um, it's said at the time that Molly was a nickname for Mary. Since we didn't live in that time, I don't know. I guess they've found some validation for that. And pitcher obviously signifies the buckets women would carry for cleaning. She joined the other wives in cooking, washing, sewing, and caring for the sick in camp and carrying water. And on June 28, 1778, Mary Hayes enlisted to serve with Captain Francis Proctor's company in the Pennsylvania Artillery. Many of the men who knew her, I love the way the men describe women, but here's this one. Describe her as a 22-year-old illiterate pregnant woman who smoked and chewed tobacco and swore as well as any of the male soldiers. She gained popularity among the troops because of her hard work under fire and bravery. And I'm going to read you a couple different versions of this. I'm going to read these notes and then I'll tell you what this says here. During the Battle of Monmouth on June 28, 1778, which is another person that's at the Battle of Monmouth, as Deborah was, Hayes allegedly solidified her legacy as an American hero. Historians report that about 50 soldiers died of thirst and dehydration that day. This meant that as many men died from heat exhaustion as they did from gunfire. Hayes went back and forth into the battle to bring water to the thirsty soldiers from a nearby spring. She stayed on the battlefield, bringing water and caring for the wounded soldiers until her own husband got hurt. And there's another picture of her. There are many versions. Let me tell you about her husband here. On June 28, 1778, her husband William's job was to load the cannon wielding a ramrod. As previously mentioned, Mary was one of the women who brought water to the artillerymen so they could cool the cannon after each shot. Without this water, the cannon would overheat and explode, killing the men who fired the gun, eliminating their own artillery and possibly endangering the army. There are many versions of her story, and I'll read a couple. I read you the one, I'll read this. I mean, obviously, no matter what, she was heroic. But they all agree that she was seen in the midst of the battle. As the battle raged, she was seen everywhere, running pails of water to the men from a spring behind the ridge, running ammunition to the gunners, and she was recorded as helping to load and fire her husband's gun with his crew, most likely after William was wounded or incapacitated from exhaustion. So you can see we have some somewhat incomplete records, a lot of oral history. But Joseph Plum Martin, a member of Colonel Silly's battalion positioned by the fence near Mary, remembered seeing a woman who during the cannonade who attended the piece the whole time. One variation of the story said that she helped her husband fire the cannon. Mary was almost hit by a musket or a cannonball that sped between her legs and ripped through her dress in an oral version of her story. Well, that could have been worse. Yeah, and somebody just said that to me. I think it was Carol. That is very true, was her response. Can you imagine? I would be a professional wimp. I can't even, what a brave woman. George Washington supposedly saw her actions on the battlefield. After the British retreated unexpectedly the next day, he made her a non-commissioned officer in the army for her deed. She apparently started calling herself Sergeant Molly from that day on, I think, but other places she called herself Captain. But this is what we do know, even though there's variations of the story, we know that she was a very brave woman, but there's still more pieces of this story to fill in. So is she Molly Pitcher? After the war, they returned to Carlisle, and my husband and I go to Gettysburg a lot, and I would love to be able to go to see her grave in Carlisle. It's not that far away, and honor her memory. We like to visit there and spend a few moments at the battlefield where soldiers died. And obviously, Molly was did not die in battle, but she certainly was a hero during the battle. Well, they returned to Carlisle and they had a son named John L. Hayes in 1780. And Mary continued to work as a servant after she had fought in the Battle of Monmouth and was heroic. She was widowed in 1786. And a year later, she married John Macaulay, or Macaulay, depending on how you spell it. The marriage was not a happy one. John was a stonecutter and a friend of her late husband and was apparently mean to her and didn't support her or her son. She either left him or he died or disappeared around 1805. Mary continued to work as a servant around town and got the reputation of being hardworking, eccentric, and coarse. Oh, that word. I'm going to say that coarse probably meant that she didn't behave in a traditional manner for women during that time, but there were some pretty high expectations on how they thought women should act during that time. In 1832, Mary Ludwig Hayes Macaulay, Sergeant Captain Molly, died. Her grave was unmarked, and her obituary didn't have any military honors or specific war contributions written in it. In 1856, her son John Hayes died, and his obituary noted that he was the son of ever to be remembered heroine, the celebrated Molly Pitcher, whose deeds of daring are recorded in the annals of the Revolution and over whom remains a monument ought to be erected. And that is the website I got that information from, and I agree. And guess what? That's going to happen. In 1822, the Pennsylvania State Legislature awarded Hayes a pension of $40 per year for his service and heroism in the war. $40 per year. Mary was buried next to her second husband, even though their marriage was unhappy, in the old Carlisle's graveyard. In 1916, a statue was erected atop her gravesite. It was sculpted by a Philadelphia artist, J. Otto Schweizer, who also sculpted many of the Gettysburg monuments. And I have not been there, but I will make it there and visit that grave. I would like to see all of them. And here, let me move myself over here because I want you to see this. I have a better picture coming up, but this is Molly Pitcher by James Kelly at the Monmouth Battle Monument, Freehold, New Jersey. So obviously he was commissioned to make this relief sculpture. There's actually 5 panels on it, and they believe Molly Pitcher was on the Battle of Monmouth. Other people believe that she was elsewhere, but maybe there are many Molly Pitchers. But why is this significant? This is by James Kelly. I don't know if this book will show. I'm going to try. Probably can't see it very well. No, you cannot, but it says Generals in Bronze. Interviewing the commanders of the Civil War, edited by William Stiple, who I met at Gettysburg. I bought several of his books. He does self-publish, but he's an interesting author, and he printed the interviews that artist James Kelly conducted with 40 Union generals in an effort to accurately portray them in their greatest moments of glory. He just didn't want to sculpt them. He wanted their story, but you're going to say, well, and some of my heroes are in here, but what does that have to do with the Battle of Monmouth? Well, he did do the sculpture for there, but I have an interesting connection here for you. There are 5 bronze relief panels. I only showed you this one because it's Molly Pitcher depicting scenes from the battle. And Kelly has a difficult time finding models who did not have mustaches or beards than being worn by most men of that era. So he prevailed upon a friend from nearby Menlo Park, New Jersey, to pose for him. Because of that, a portrait of the 30-year-old Thomas Alva Edison can be found on the monument as Molly Pitcher's husband. There's Molly. That's Thomas Edison. I know it's really hard to see, but I would love to go visit this as well. I didn't know this, but I was talking to the author when he was signing a book at the bookstore at the Gettysburg Museum. And he said that there was I told him where I worked, and I talked about one of my heroes, Joshua Chamberlain. And then I talked about Thomas. I used to volunteer there, but of course I work here at Edison Ford Winter Estates. And he said there was something about Edison in this book. So I'm going to read this briefly. Even though we're focusing on Molly Pitcher, I would like to talk about Edison just for a minute. Thomas Edison was 31 years of age and I 22 when I first met him at Menlo Park. At the time, New York was beginning to hear of him. A reporter from the New York Herald was detailed to report his doings and sayings. This was taken up by other papers, and in a short time, the entire United States and finally Europe fairly rang and echoed with the name and wonders of Edison's work. The editor of the Scientific American referred to him as the young man in New Jersey who was making the path to the patent office hot with his footsteps. When the first fierce lights of publicity were forced on him, Edison showed no sign. Praise was showered upon him that would have turned the heads of anyone but a superior genius, one capable of appreciating the great work he had already accomplished in relation to the much greater work he saw before him. I've met him after one of his long, concentrated vigils when he was unshaven and worn. He got very wrapped up in what he was doing. And this is when he would have been married to his first wife, Mary Stilwell, by the way, yet was as cheerful and joyous as was his wont. Some different things that I've read about Edison before. He did not feel called upon to indulge in those temperamental tantrums to prove his claim to genius. With his staff, he prepared more of a comrade than a dictator. He was always ready to listen to the suggestions of the most minor subordinates, and if they impressed him favorably and proved successful, he would give them credit. He was never assertive or opinionated or broke into a conversation. He was not what I would call a conversationalist, but talked in nuggets. He responded to a good joke with almost boyish glee, but never got into one. Edison was the friend and the ideal of my youth. I'm getting to the good part about Molly Pitcher's husband, and seemed to look upon me as a boy and never allowed me to grow up. And as a tribute to my having been born in New York City, called me a New York City Cockney. When Edison would meet me, he would put on a swagger and address me in the vaudeville New York vernacular. So he spoke with a New York accent. Kelly's artwork continued to be featured in Scribner's Monthly and St. Nicholas magazines for several years. His drawings were notable for their vigorous action, and his style of engraving, I'm going to skip ahead, was radical at the time. He frequently fought with the old-time engravers who struggled to reproduce his drawings in accordance to his idea of the way they should be engraved. In 1877, so I'm skipping ahead here, James Kelly was credited with changing the centuries-old method of wood engraving. So he comes up with a different form of engraving. And let me just quickly tell you about that. He said that he read that several of his neighbors called him a penny artist. Later, they showed me newspaper notices, and I finally became used to them as the magazines came out every month, and they criticized his sketching. But the Hartford Courant, which Mark Twain was at the time associated, said, the boss artist is Kelly on Scribner's Monthly. Shortly after this, I was asked to attend some illustrations, and people started sending for him. And he began to be noted for his work on wood and steel and was employed to cut illustrations, which opened up a whole new world for him, and he became a sculptor. But this is why he's going to talk about Thomas Edison, because Thomas Edison didn't have a beard or a mustache, and he asked him to pose for him, which seems like something that's pretty far out there that Thomas Edison would have never done. There's more information in this book, and you can find it on Amazon. But he ends up being on here as Molly Pitcher's wounded husband, which I just find really fascinating. Who would have thought there was a connection between Molly Pitcher and Thomas Edison? And if you look up here, you can see him right there. And I would like to go visit this. And I'd like to really know more about their friendship. In 1928, Molly Pitcher was honored with an overprint reading Molly Pitcher on a United States postage stamp. There's no slash in there. Earlier that year, a celebration had been planned to celebrate the 150th anniversary of the Battle of Monmouth. Stamp collectors petitioned the U.S. Postal Department for a commemorative stamp to mark the anniversary. After receiving several rejections, New Jersey Congressman Ernest Ackerman, a stamp collector himself, enlisted the assistance of the majority leader of the House, John Q. Tilson, Postmaster General. John Q. Tilson, period. Postmaster General Harry New refused to issue a commemorative stamp specifically acknowledging the battle or Molly Pitcher, because that's not Molly Pitcher or the battle there. And a telegram to Tilson, Postmaster New, to the congressman, explained, finally, however, I've agreed to put a surcharge title on 10 million of the regular Washington 2-cent stamps bearing the name Molly Pitcher. So they put, they lettered her name on there, but she has George Washington behind her. And he was the commanding general, the woman deserved her own stamp, don't you think? I think that was a little bit of sexism. But here's what happens. Molly's finally pictured on an imprinted stamp on a postcard issued in 1978 for the 200th anniversary of the battle. And guess what's coming up this year? I think you all know it's going to be for the 250th anniversary of the Revolution, 1776, when we declare our independence. But I didn't feel like the story of Molly Pitcher was well known. I've actually had heard of Deborah Sampson, and I'd heard of Molly Pitcher, but I learned a lot more. And this is just my concluding statement. And a letter to her husband, John Adams, during the Revolution, Abigail Adams, and when he's president, by the way, second president of the United States, I desire you would remember the ladies. And I'm going to say, remember all those women. I think we should remember the contributions of all women and the three who represent Molly Pitcher during the battles in the Revolutionary War. And they lived in a time where women were defined by the roles assigned to them. These three, as well as other women, blazed new trails that opened doors for other women. What they faced wasn't glamorous or even recognized during their lifetime. And really, it does bother me how many times they say they were coarse and not feminine. I mean, they put themselves at risk for our country, for our independence. And yes, two of them had their husbands there, but they still continued when their husbands were killed or injured. They contributed American independence and the long road for freedom and more opportunity for women, because we know women don't get the vote for a very long time. We might not know who exactly Molly Pitcher was, though there's a lot of pictures out there, but we know that they all embodied her spirit. And in my opinion, she's a hero, or as I used to like to say, Shiro. That is my information about Molly Pitcher. I'm sorry about the start, it was a little rough. I thank you for joining me. That shows your view on life and sense of humor. Well, that could have been worse. And I love that too, by the way, that quote. It could have been worse. She was a very brave woman, and whichever one it is, I'm thankful. I thank you for joining me.